It's pretty hard to be sane and to have a functional identity without being married or the equivalent if you're an adult. You need someone who's a long-term partner, because otherwise your life is a mess of loneliness or short-term chaotic relationships. And it's very difficult to be sane and happy when that's happening. What seems to provide people with stabilization in their life and hope is the fostering of a hierarchical network of social interactions. It's very hard to maintain your equilibrium unless you have at least some family, right? Some siblings, parents that you have a bonded relationship with, that you're in interaction with, that you have joint projects with. You have to have friends. You should be involved in a network of economic exchange. You should be pursuing some civic responsibility. Maybe you have a religious obligation to pursue and participate in some spiritual tradition. And it has to be a tradition too, because otherwise it just spirals off into a kind of new age insanity. And it isn't obvious to me that people can live happy lives, because people say they want to be happy, which I don't really think is also true. I think people want to have an adventure and they don't want to be miserable, and that's not exactly the same as being happy. But I don't think that you can pursue any of that stably without being embedded in those multitude of hierarchical social relationships. And that's all dependent on responsibility, not on short-term self-gratification and a kind of atomistic hedonism. And if you explain that to young people, they figure it out right away, especially if you ally that with the idea of developing the kind of embeddedness in the social community that helps sustain you in the face of tragedy. Because what do you have when things go wrong? You've got the people you love and who love you. You've got your friends. You've got hopefully your career and maybe your creative endeavors. You have the service you can provide to others at the level of civic responsibility. And none of that's been discussed in some real sense for about 60 years. And all of that's core to the kind of identity that stops people from being absolutely anxiety-ridden and hopeless. And conservatives really have all that within their grasp if they wanted to take it. And it sounds like that's the sort of thing that you're working on pursuing.
That's exactly right. And I think we do need to take it. And I think that there's a vacuum created and it should be filled with what I regard to be very simple truths. I mean, I think the simple truths are the most profound. I believe it's impossible, by the way, to divorce it from a religious worldview, let's say, the Judeo-Christian worldview, for example, because that is where we find our meaning. I think what you just described is God's created order for things, for the individual, for the family, for society. We are made in the image of God. The founders of this country believe that God is the one that created us and he gives us all the same rights. And God created us to serve. We find our greatest meaning. I mean, that the Bible is filled with this admonition that if you are to be great, you are to serve. And the greatest is the greatest servant. And so that's where you find your value. He intended the family to be, for obvious reasons, the first unit of community. And upon that, we build a healthy and vibrant society.